This is the book Winning Arguments by Morgan Thomas, read by the author. Section 1, Arguments and Debates. Winning arguments is what I aim to show how to do in this text. I will show how this can be done by constructing winning arguments. As just illustrated, the phrase winning arguments has at least two important senses. First, winning arguments can be interpreted to refer to an activity, the activity of winning arguments, where argument here is used in the sense of debate. Second, winning arguments can be interpreted as a noun phrase, where argument is used in the sense of a series of statements designed to provide reason to believe some conclusion. In this interpretation of the phrase, winning is an adjective, presumably meaning something like persuasive. A great deal of importance has been introduced in the preceding 3 paragraphs, so let's unpack the ideas further. The first item of importance is the distinction between two senses of the word argument. Arguments in the first sense of the word are debates. By debates, I mean exchanges of communication where participants discuss with each other the merits and demerits of some claims that they are mutually interested in and believe themselves to disagree about, or are uncertain about. Arguments in the second sense of the term are series of statements designed to provide reason to believe some conclusion. Henceforth, in this text I will consistently use the term argument to refer to arguments in the second sense, and I will use the term debate in order to retire the first sense of the term argument. Here is an example of an argument. Question science is the name of this argument, and here it is. You shouldn't uncritically accept the conclusions of all scientific studies you come across. Ioannidis 2005 is a scientific study which claims that most published research findings are false. If you should uncritically accept the conclusions of all scientific studies you come across, then you should accept Ioannidis 2005. But if you uncritically accept Ioannidis 2005, then you accept that most scientific studies draw false conclusions. That means you shouldn't uncritically accept the conclusions of all scientific studies you come across, because if you do, you can expect to be adopting a lot of false beliefs. Let's analyze this argument, which I will refer to as question science. Question science seeks to prove that you should not uncritically accept the conclusions of all scientific studies you come across. It proceeds by assuming for the sake of argument the opposite of what it seeks to prove, and deriving an absurd result. It assumes for the sake of argument that we should uncritically accept the conclusions of all scientific studies we come across, and ends by deriving the absurd conclusion that you should do something which will lead to you adopting a lot of false beliefs. Let's step through the argument. We begin with the assumption for the sake of argument that you should uncritically accept all scientific studies you come across. The next move is based on the observation that if somebody thinks that way, you can make them believe anything that's said in a published scientific paper. The next move is to point out a paper, Ioannidis 2005, which will make us believe under our sake of argument assumption that most scientific studies conclude things that are false. This tells us that the thing we assumed we should do will lead us to hold many false beliefs. With the further assumption that we should not uncritically accept information that's likely to be false, we can refute the statement that we started out by assuming. In other words, we can conclude that we should not uncritically accept the conclusions of all scientific studies we come across. Question science is an example of a reductio ad absurdum argument. A reductio ad absurdum argument, in a strict sense, is one that proceeds by assuming the negation of its conclusion and deriving a logical contradiction thereby. In a looser sense, a reductio ad absurdum argument can derive, instead of a logical contradiction, an absurd consequence that will probably be unacceptable to the audience of the argument, leading the audience to reject the assumption that leads to that consequence. Question science is a reductio ad absurdum argument in the looser sense. In question science, We first assume the view we wish to refute, and with a modest amount of information and background assumptions, we get to the conclusion that our assumption will likely lead us to accept many false things as true, something which makes most people want to back out of the assumption. Question science is an example of a winning argument. I expect the reader agrees. It is hard to disagree with the reasoning or the conclusion. I haven't encountered anybody who finds this argument unpersuasive. One reason the argument is so strong is the simplicity and effectiveness of its structure, which is based on the reductio ad absurdum idea that is the basis of many good arguments stretching back to ancient times. Let's round out this discussion with an example of an argument which is a reductio ad absurdum in the strict sense, that is, an argument which proceeds by assuming the opposite of that which it seeks to prove, and deriving a logical contradiction from that assumption. As our example, we will do an informal version of the classic proof, due to Euclid, that there are infinitely many prime numbers. Infinitude of primes is the name of this argument, and here it is. Recall that a prime number is a whole number greater than 1, which is divisible only by itself and 1. Suppose, towards reaching a contradiction, that there are finitely many prime numbers. Let x be the number resulting from multiplying together all the prime numbers and adding 1. Since x is evidently larger than all prime numbers, x is not prime. The fact that x is not prime means, by definition, that x is divisible by at least one prime number. Pick a prime number that x is divisible by and call it p. We know that the remainder of dividing x by p is 0, since that's what it means for x to be divisible by p. However, we also know that the remainder of dividing x by p is 1, because of how we produced x. This is a contradiction, demonstrating that our original assumption was false, or in other words, that there are infinitely many prime numbers. So why is it true, as I said at the second to last sentence of the argument, that the remainder of dividing x by p is 1? Well, we produced x by multiplying together all the finitely many prime numbers and adding 1. Therefore, p goes into x minus 1 evenly, i.e., the remainder of the division, x minus 1 over p, is 0, and therefore, the remainder of the division x over p is 1. Infinitude of primes is another example of a winning argument. Mathematical theorems, like the theorem that there are infinitely many prime numbers, are extraordinarily uncontroversial. This can be explained at least in part by the statement that math is a game that has simple and essentially agreed upon rules. By describing math as a game, I do not mean to imply that math is not an activity of seeking truth. I don't mean to take any position in this text on whether or not math is an activity of seeking the truth. Nonetheless, correct mathematical proofs are some of the best examples we have of winning arguments, due to their seemingly very reliable persuasive power. We've dug a bit into the concept of arguments in the sense of series of statements designed to provide reason to believe some conclusion. Let's now return to the distinction we made between debates and arguments. Debates almost always involve the participants making arguments. Can arguments occur anywhere except in the context of debates? One place where you can find arguments is in books, especially nonfiction books. One can argue that an argument in a book is not in the context of any particular debate, because a book is an inanimate object that can exist in many copies in different places and times. Books are objects which are incapable of participating reciprocally in debates. You can, in a certain sense, let a book make arguments to you by reading it. You can also respond to the book's arguments, mentally, in your journal, to other people, to the author, etc. But the book cannot respond to your responses to its arguments. The author might be able to, if they're still alive, but that's another issue. This is what I mean when I say that books cannot participate reciprocally in debates. For these and many other reasons, you might say that arguments in books do not necessarily occur in the context of any debate, or perhaps that they never do. Nonetheless, You might argue that arguments in books usually do occur in the context of some debate or another. This idea is palatable if we accept, as examples of debates, ongoing public debates. An ongoing public debate on a question, roughly, is a situation where lots of people make arguments on and have debates on the question across a significant slice of space and time, probably across a region of the world for years, a region or the world. If you accept ongoing public debates as examples of debates, then you will probably accept that most arguments in most books occur in the context of some debate. A possible exception to this generalization is the hypothetical case where somebody writes a book which makes arguments on a topic nobody else has discussed, and then nobody reads the book. In this case, you could, for the sake of uniformity, say that the book occurs in the context of a debate involving one person, the author. However, this might be odd to say because there seems to be something inherently interactive, social, multi-personal about debates. I think most people are going to be inclined to say that the arguments in this book do not occur in the context of any debate. The possibility of such an exception to the generalization that arguments in books occur in the context of some debate makes more sense when we consider the plausibility of the idea that an argument in a book can occur in the context of multiple debates. For example, a single book about climate change can be involved in the overall public debate on climate change, while simultaneously being involved in many particular interpersonal debates about climate change, each occurring between a specific group of people together in one location in physical space or cyberspace. It seems reasonable to talk in this way and to say that the book is involved in multiple debates on one subject. If the number of debates a book is involved in can vary in number, then it seems only natural that the number could in principle equal 0, though that probably isn't common in reality. So far, we've reached 3 generalizations about the relationship between arguments and debates. 1. Arguments usually occur in the context of debates. 2. Debates usually contain arguments. 3. Arguments can, in principle, occur outside the context of debates. In my estimation, all of these points are important. That arguments usually occur in the context of debates, and debates usually contain arguments, tells us that arguments and debates are importantly related to each other, and we need to understand them together. That arguments can, in principle, occur outside the context of debates, tells us that arguments can be understood independently from debates, though it doesn't tell us whether that's the most useful way to understand them. It's probably not the case, on the other hand, that debates can be understood independently from arguments, since skilled debates are almost always, in essence, exchanges of arguments. So we will take both of the available approaches to understanding arguments. One can understand arguments either within the context of debates or independently from debates. We will do both. Studying arguments outside the context of debates helps us focus in on arguments' intrinsic properties, and thereby understand arguments themselves much better. However, the perspective is unbalanced if we don't also study arguments in the practical context of debates as they occur in reality. Hopefully that discussion of the relationships between debates and arguments has clarified for the reader the distinction between debates and arguments, as well as helping to clarify each concept individually. Let's return to our original task of clarifying the meaning of the first 3 paragraphs of this introduction. So far we've clarified the meanings of 2 critical words, debate and argument. Yet many words of nebulous, dubious, or unclear meaning remain. First and foremost, winning, but also, with the evident nebulousness, dubiousness, or unclarity, depending in part on where and how deep you've traveled into philosophy. True, reason, believe, persuasive, and statement. Let's analyze the meanings of these words, starting with winning. What is winning? For starters, winning is most often something that happens to people in the context of games, chess, baseball, etc. Question: is winning something that ever happens to people except in the context of some game? To make a start on what's going to be a highly roundabout answer to this question, let's consider the phrase winning at life. Winning at life is a form of winning, at least on a surface inspection of the phrase. One can also hypothesize that winning at life is in some usages a phrase with its own particular meaning that doesn't decompose as winning in the context of life, in the same way that a close shave doesn't always refer to a shave that was close. If winning at life is winning in the context of life, and winning only ever happens in the context of some game, then it follows that life is a game. So, then, is life a game? Life is a game is a truism, a statement that people are liable to spout as a form of shallow wisdom, perhaps without much reflection on how true it really is. How true is the truism? To answer that, we need to ask, what does the truism mean? To answer that, we need to ask, what do the words in the truism, life is a game, mean? Life seems to refer to human life, and probably it's clear enough what we're referring to there. What about game?